Addressing Gettysburg.
Look at something and let the evidence, you always hear detectives say this. It's like, you have to let the evidence tell you the story.
Yeah.
But that's really hard to do, even for detectives.
Yeah.
Because you got an idea on a guy and you're like, well, it's this guy.
I mean, really, it's the same way in writing history. I mean, there are, legions of people who they have an agenda. They seek out the evidence that supports their agenda. They discredit the evidence that doesn't support their agenda. And to me, those sorts of pieces of history are like an op-ed.
Yeah.
That's not history.
Right.
History is one book I'll never forget. When I started in the Park Service, I read this book called Portrait of a Hero, which was a biography of Eisenhower. And the guy admitted in the beginning of it, and he said, I started this book to bring Eisenhower down a peg because I thought he had been elevated beyond what he should be. And
who are you, though? Who is that guy?
But he didn't, because he said the evidence did not support what I thought. So he wrote a really good book.
Okay.
Because he let the evidence guide what he wrote. It wasn't his bias that,
Yeah. That's there was a book called The Case for Christ, I think.
Okay.
And it was written by this guy who was like a Chicago Sun or Times reporter. And his wife something happened. I think their daughter died or something like that. And his wife became very religious. And he was like, what is this bullshit? Like he was an atheist, right?
Yeah.
And so she was like, no, it's real. It's true. It's, I believe it and everything. And so he tried to disprove all of that.
Yeah.
And he became a believer because he would talk to all these, theologians and priests and bishops and popes and, not the Pope, but, like all these big people. And then he would talk to doctors about, a crucifixion and what does that do to the body and all this stuff and everything. And through all this stuff, he became a believer, but he was trying to disprove it. And I always find those stories to be interesting because it takes a lot of honesty.
It does.
To say, I set out to knock Eisenhower down a peg, but I found out I was wrong. And, because you put a lot of time and effort into that.
There's a certain humility. And also, I think there's a temptation amongst people is you're going to sell more books if you have a little angle in there that is like,
but I think the angle
story.
But I think the angle of I was proven wrong, I think is far more compelling.
It is.
I'll read that.
Yeah.
That's why I read that Case for Christ book, because I was like, well, how does this guy go from because I have a friend who's a very staunch atheist, right?
Yeah.
He's not a nasty atheist. He's just very, no, I don't, there's nothing. I'm an evidence guy. I need evidence. And I was like, okay, and he, so I go, well, okay, this guy needs evidence. This guy was looking for evidence to disprove it, but he's so I was interested to see how it all happened for him. But I just find that to be a far more compelling thing. I'll read that book any day over somebody who's like, I set out to do this and here's my proof.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which is why I like the conclusion that you came to about the Harvest of Death photos. Nobody else is saying where they are.
Right.
Like, and also there was a point when I was thinking, I was driving down the Emmitsburg Road, and right after the intersection of Wheatfield Road and pumping station, actually it's on the pumping station side, and I just kind of caught a glimpse of that field in front of the Longstreet Tower, and I go and I look at it, and I'm like, well, that might be what would be the Chambersburg Pike angle, right?
Right.
But then I took the picture out there a few days later, and no, not even close. Like your eyes can play tricks on you too when you're out there.
Yeah.
Because there's because the reverse doesn't work.
That's right. Yeah.
So, I don't know. I find it all very fascinating.
I for many, many, many years was absolutely convinced it was on the southern end of the field because that would be the first place the photographers hit.
Yeah.
So I'm like, I'm just not finding the right angle. It's got to be down there. And But I also always looked at, there's got to be, the evidence of the photograph has to be reflected in what actually happened in that area of the field.
Right.
So that does limit to where you can go. And that's why some of these things are so ludicrous. Like somebody has them on the west side of Seminary Ridge, like, the 3rd Maine. And then there was the one with the 6th New Jersey, I think it was, not 6th. That was a New Jersey regiment that was on the skirmish line that was west of the Emmitsburg Road. And I'm like, look, guys, the evidence doesn't support, this is impossible.
Right.
But I was just convinced it had to be down there. And it wasn't until finally I felt I had looked at every possible angle you could imagine that this could be taken, because there's a limited number of places it could be. That's why I find it so comical when people are like, well, it's out there. They just haven't found it yet. I'm like, really? Really? It's out there?
Yeah.
Okay. No, it is. No. There's only a limited number of places it can be.
Yeah.
So you narrow your search to those. It's like saying, well, we've got this weapon and we've got these bloodstains, but we're not sure. It's out there somewhere. Right.
Yeah. But the thing is, though, about, to me, because the shot of the dead looking south, there's not a lot other than the dead in that shot, right? I mean, you've got the background, you got the tree line there.
Yeah.
But it's the reverse that has a lot more detail. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Fence lines are all torn down, but you can tell where there were fences, orchards, the slope of the land, the Sheeds Woods, right? And like it's all there, and it all matches up where it should be in relation to everything.
It is. It is.
So you mentioned the graves when we were talking in the hallway. Mm-hmm. I lost my question. You mentioned did you use the Elliott map to try to corroborate anything there?
Not really, because the Elliott map is interesting for like where groups of graves are. Okay. And sometimes it's interesting for an individual grave that he identified, right? Mm-hmm. But I found it's not, you can't use that to say, here is exactly where, it's approximate where some of these graves are that he's finding. It's kind of approximate. So I don't remember that I looked at the Elliott map specifically at that, but there are graves that he certainly missed when he was recording this.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of flaws to that map.
There is. Even his Antietam map is the same way.
Yeah.
Really interesting map. There's a lot of interesting things in it. It certainly has many uses and value, but it's not gospel. Right. It's not like, okay, this guy, he documented it really carefully. He's not like, I forget his name, the Fry listing of the Union dead. Now that one, I mean, he was really specific about that. 40 yards due east of the, so-and-so barn. And, that was really specific. So you could pretty much know exactly where these graves were, because he needed to make it pretty specific for people to find the graves.
Okay, so last night we went, you did a tour for CWI, and it was supposed to be Indiana at Gettysburg, but I guess you went a little over. We ran out of time in daylight. But I had to leave early because my foot was hurting me. I just getting old, and I had to get off my feet. So, but I stayed for the 19th Indiana portion of it, which was the first one. And what really got me was going to their monument. Well, first of all, the first thing was the first stop we were at was up on McPherson's Ridge along Reynolds Avenue. And you were talking about when they came in and the order that they came in and where they went. And it totally threw off the way I always pictured it. Because, like you look at, like, say, for example, the Lano map book or Gottfried's maps. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And, when you're not out there looking at it, you kind of, your mind plays tricks on you where everything is in relation to things. And I always thought that the whole Iron Brigade like went into the woods.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
But that's not the way it happened. They came. The 19th Indiana came in. What was it? 2nd Wisconsin.
They're the first.
Then the 19th.
Then the 7th.
Then the 7th, right?
And then the 19th. Right.
So they're the third one in line, but they're out where like Biddle's Brigade monuments are.
Yep.
Which I didn't know before.
Yeah.
I thought they pushed the Confederates out of the woods. Right. I thought Archer's brigade had. So Archer's coming in from the west, and I thought that his right flank had basically started pushing Cutler's left, or I guess. Well, no,
I guess the 14th Brooklyn, and the 84th New York that are up there along.
So they're coming in on them and starting to push them north, and the 2nd comes in and slams into Archer's right.
Yeah,
and everybody just piles into the woods.
Yeah.
But I had no idea that fighting was further south there.
Yeah.
Which that's interesting to me.
Yeah, no, it is. It's funny, these certain areas of the Gettysburg battlefield or the Gettysburg battle, that a narrative grows up, and a lot of times you can trace where these narratives originate from.
Yeah.
But a narrative grows up about something that it happened such and such a way. And this is the image people began to create in their mind. Like an example is Archer's brigade enters McPherson's Woods, which is what they would always call it, in the early stuff. Mm-hmm. And then the Iron Brigade drives them out of McPherson's Woods.
Right.
Because the woods is the landmark that's in the area. But if you were to put one of the veterans who was there under question, he'd be like, I wasn't in the woods. I was out in the field.
Yeah.
And I went down to the creek, we crossed the creek, but really the only guys who were in the woods was the 2nd Wisconsin. They were really the only unit in the woods. Everybody else was outside of the woods. And we know that only 2 of Archer's regiments were actually in the woods, the 7th and 14th Tennessee. And then the 1st Tennessee was kind of, maybe some of it was in the scrubby area where the 19th Indiana later would fight.
Okay.
But it extended down along Willoughby Run. And research I did for a paper I wrote years ago convinced me that because the Confederates really had no idea, they had no idea they were going to run into Union infantry.
Right.
Like Archer had been warned by Pettigrew on the night of June 30th, because Pettigrew learned they're going back to Gettysburg tomorrow. The whole division's going. Archer's brigade's leading the column. So why is Archer leading the column? Because they rotated which brigade led the march each day, and it was Archer's turn. And it is conceivable that Archer led the column because Heath wanted his most experienced brigadier leading the column. I don't know. We don't know that. But anyway, Pettigrew went to him with this aide of his, Lewis Young, and said, hey, man, be careful. And really be careful. There's this road that comes in from the right. I think he was describing the Hare Ridge Road. Mm-hmm. And he says that is a potential flanking maneuver that they might use against you. And Lewis Young, who wrote about this, he said, Archer listened, but believed not. But I think what happened is when Archer's brigade, they've pushed the cavalry back, they've reached Willoughby Run, the left flank of the brigade starts to move into the woods, climbing up from the run, up to the area where today you'd see the 7th Wisconsin, 2nd Wisconsin monuments, 24th Michigan, climbing up into that area. The 1st Tennessee had kind of a really marshy area that they had to work around, and that delayed the movement a little bit.
Okay.
And then the 13th Alabama's on the far right flank. But I think as these guys come up out of Willoughby Run and they see the 2nd Wisconsin suddenly coming over the ridge, the 7th and 14th give them a volley, shoot down a bunch of men. I think Archer sees, these are the guys who are fighting Cutler or fighting Davis to the north. This is their flank.
Okay.
So he orders the 13th Alabama to wheel around in the field and hit the flank of the 2nd Wisconsin. And as they're beginning to execute this movement is when the 7th Wisconsin appears. And then all of a sudden everybody's like, uh-oh. Right.
Because now they're coming in on the 13th flank.
Not yet, but they're coming up. They're extending the line. And then the uh-oh is, maybe this isn't the left end of their line. There might be more people coming. So I think that checks this attempted flanking movement.
Got it.
Then the 19th appears, and then they're like, uh-oh, now it's really
So now we
then
gotta deal with
when the
this.
24th appears, then everybody's like, oh boy, we got to get out because they're gonna outflank us and roll up our flank.
So they're delayed first by the marshy ground, and
First
then
Tennessee, and that kind of delays the brigade.
right, okay,
Yeah.
and then they're delayed further after changing front to flank what they think is the left of Cutler. Then they get delayed even more when they realize that they've got a problem.
There's a
up
whole
on Furston's Ridge.
bunch more Yankees than were anticipated. Yeah. I mean, there is contemporary evidence from Confederate soldiers that from the line soldiers, the enlisted men, that they were told when they marched to Gettysburg, the only thing you're going to run into is militia.
Right.
Because I remember, I looked for it recently. I couldn't find it. There was a soldier of the 76th New York or the 56th Pennsylvania who was wounded in Cutler's brigade. And when Davis's men overran their position, this soldier wrote about afterwards that one of the Confederates is like, what's the Army of the Potomac doing here? They told us it was just militia.
Right.
So, and then there's the famous story when the Tennesseans see the 2nd Wisconsin coming into the woods. And I've always kind of considered it apocryphal, but I think it is possible. It's true. There's them black-catted fellers again. Tain't no militia. It's the Army of the Potomac.
Right.
Well, I think it's possible somebody did say that because they'd been told, no, that like this is like the 3rd team.
Right.
We're going to run right over these guys.
Yeah. You mentioned before about how you can sometimes trace where narratives start.
Yeah.
And one of them that we talked about on a show a couple of weeks ago, not in depth, but it came up on a show that it wasn't about this, is this whole notion of, which I don't hear anybody say anymore, so it's an old thing, but when I started coming here, this was still being said.
Yeah.
That Stuart on July 3rd, his whole movement was to get behind the Union Center and pierce it as Pickett, pierces it. He's gonna hit him in the ass, and they're gonna just rip the line in two.
Yeah.
And of course, we all poked holes in that story heavily. But where do you trace that back to?
Well, that goes back to both Confederate and Union veterans, cavalry veterans.
Okay.
Union cavalry veterans are trying to ascribe great meaning to their action east of Gettysburg.
Right.
So everybody wants their action to be the crucial one. So this saves the day. And nobody's content with, it was pretty important, but it didn't save the day, right? I mean, it was important.
Yeah.
I mean, because I don't think anyone would say the action at East Cavalry Battlefield wasn't important. It was important because it removed Stuart as any sort of an asset in Lee's July 3rd plans, right? But I think on the Union side, they were thinking, okay, we have to make this more important than it was. So we think Stuart was coming in to attack the rear of the army.
Okay.
Right? So Pickett's going to attack the front. Stuart's going to attack the rear. They're going to try and squeeze us. And then on the Confederate side, it is, I think some of the writers didn't have any idea what Stuart's orders were. And one of the things that the Civil War is famous for, because they had so many orders that were given verbally, well, you can just say whatever the order is.
Sure.
You can just make it up.
Right.
They did it all the time.
Yeah.
I mean, another famous example of that is, James Longstreet writing in his memoirs that he didn't get any orders on the night of July 2nd. So he didn't have any orders. I'm like, that's not true. That's just not true. There's no way that Richard Ewell is clear in his report that he received orders and what those orders were. There's no way that James Longstreet did not receive orders and that Jeb Stuart didn't receive orders. They all got orders. But the thing about it that is an advantage if you're a Longstreet or you're a Stuart, defender, is that you can just make up whatever you think they were, or say that you didn't get them.
Yeah,
prove it. Prove I didn't get them.
Right.
Show me the orders. They were verbal. The orders were verbal, and when you realize how Civil War, and it took me a long time to understand these things about Civil War, but when you understand how in the Civil War, based upon the time it takes to write orders out and deliver orders to people, how oftentimes in the midst of active operations, you simply had to use verbal orders. Yeah. And one of the things about Lee, this was a strength of Lee, but it also could come back to bite you, which was he gave a lot of discretion to his subordinate commanders. So I'm sure what Longstreet's orders were, which were the same as Ewell's, and that was renew your attack in the morning, reinforce yourself with picket, attack somewhere on your front. You determine where it is, where you think you're going to have the most chance of success. So some people are like, oh, he's going to try and go around the round tops, or he's going to attack Little Round Top, or he's going to attack. We have no idea. There's no idea. And the reason Ewell attacks Culp's Hill is because when Ewell assesses, because he has the same sort of orders, when he assesses the situation, he's got a lodgment on Culp's Hill. The attack on Cemetery Hill was repulsed. Rhodes didn't even attack because the front side of Cemetery Hill was so lethal to assault. Right. He decides the only place I can attack with any hope of success is Culp's Hill. So he reinforces Culp's Hill. And I'm sure with Jeb Stuart, the orders were probably fairly general that Stuart knows the Army is going to make another major attack. And his job is simply to get himself into a position to exploit the attack that drives the Union Army out of its position, and he can harass their communications. He can pursue them and retreat. He's just there to do mayhem. Right.
Okay.
So the thing that makes the whole Pickett's Charge thing so absurd is that Lee doesn't decide to make Pickett's Charge until the morning of July the 3rd. And by the time he made the decision to make Pickett's Charge, he does send orders to Ewell to break off the action until Longstreet's ready. We don't know if he sent anybody out to Jeb Stuart. That's like a 4 mile ride, maybe 5 mile ride. And you have to consider that these couriers are going about 5 miles an hour, maybe 5-6 miles an hour on a horse. They're not going to kill their horse to get there because it's not a critical order to deliver.
Yeah.
So that's an hour to get out to Jeb Stuart, at least, with his order, approximately. And then what? I mean, so he may have told Stuart what he told Longstreet, which was, or what he told Ewell. Longstreet won't be ready to attack till 10 a.m. If you read Ewell's report says he was informed Longstreet would attack at 10 a.m.
Okay.
So it's clear to me in these discussions between Lee and Longstreet that Longstreet assures Lee, I think you're going to have this attack ready to go by 10, right? And it's not an accident that at Culp's Hill at 10 a.m. in the morning, Johnson orders this suicidal attack by Stuart and Daniel's brigades against the Union works, and both brigade commanders protest the order because they've had the whole morning to test this, and they're like, this is madness.
Right.
But the protest goes all the way up to Ewell and comes back, make the attack. Why does it do that? Because Longstreet's supposed to attack at 10 o'clock. And Ewell feels, I have to make this attack to pin the Union forces over here.
Got it.
So he forces those commanders to do it. These things all fit together eventually. And then, of course, Longstreet's not ready till 1. Right. So this attack is a complete fiasco. And then with Jeb Stuart, he's just probing around out there. He's not sure exactly. He has road maps, so he kind of knows the way to get down towards the Baltimore Pike, which he knows, I'm sure he knows, is the real threat to the Yankees, because that's got to be their main line of supply, their main line of communications. So he's probably looking for some way to get down there and threaten that at the very least. But he's playing the role of cavalry. You want to make trouble for the enemy. You want to be a diversion. You want to make trouble for them. You want to harass them. You want to probe them. But the one thing you're not going to do, you're not going to make a mounted charge in the rear of the Union Army. When you have, the other thing about these is so in a lot of ways very laughable, is that he has absolutely no intelligence whatsoever about where exactly Union forces are located. He's not going to take his cavalry into that. You're just not going to do it.
So what Lee had to have given him some order to at least go to our left or something, right?
I'm sure he did. Yeah.
So, but this idea, and this is what we got into in the conversation, was like from where East Cavalry Field is, let's say, and you want to get to the rear of the Second Corps, like the traveling that you have to do.
It's all day.
It's all right.
It's all day.
It's all day. And then once you get to what would you take, like Low Dutch to the Baltimore Pike, or could you get up there sooner than when it hits Baltimore Pike? I don't know if you can you?
Yeah, I don't.
Or I guess you
unless
could
you go cross country because you have the Hanover Road and then you're going to the Baltimore Pike. So unless you tried to go in along the Hanover Road, but even then,
but that's a little.
So he might have tried to take some.
Oh, what's that road that runs parallel to
Route 15 today?
Now? Yeah,
yeah,
Fairview or something.
Yeah, I forget the name of that.
Highland.
Yeah, he could have tried to move along that, but then there's all these Yankees. I mean, so he could have caused mayhem with the supply trains and everything like that. Like he could have done that. He could have.
But this idea that he's going to then get on the Baltimore Pike, go up behind the barb of the fish hook.
Right.
And then
as if he knows exactly where the barb
exactly,
ends.
Right, exactly. And then he's going to and he's doing all this uncontested, unnoticed, right? And then he's going to just turn left and hit the back of Hancock's men. But he's got to go through all that land between Baltimore Pike and the Taneytown Road. Like it's just fanciful.
It's also, I mean, I think a lot of times, when we're first studying battles like Gettysburg, we don't really comprehend what a fog it is for the opposing commanders as to where exactly the enemy is. So that's part of the reason why you're always probing the enemy with your mounted forces in particular, or with your skirmish lines, because you're trying to determine where are they?
Yeah.
Who are they? So if you can get some prisoners and find out who they are in your front, but you're always doing that. And, if you look at, I'm no expert on the East Cavalry battlefield actions, but if you look at the movements of Stuart, it's very clear Stuart has no idea what's in his front. He's just probing. Mm-hmm. He's literally probing because he knows there might be Union cavalry out there because he's had enough fights with them recently. I mean, in that direction at Hanover and at Hunterstown. So they got to be out there somewhere. Where are they? He's trying to figure out where they are.
Yeah.
Cannon shots he does, right?
What, Mike?
The cannon shots he does in multiple directions.
Oh, that's right.
It's not to alert Lee that he's behind the lines. It's to find out if there's anybody out there.
That's right. That's right. That's very good.
See if there's any movement or something. Right. Yeah.
That's a good point.
I forgot about that detail. Yeah. The cannon shots.
Yeah, he fires in several different directions.
Yeah.
And you don't fire a cannon. Like, the reason you do that
to signal
is to flush enemy troops out of positions.
So you're saying you don't fire it in different directions to signal to your commander, who is going to be able to discern your cannon shot from all the others.
Exactly.
Yeah. No, so, but the thing is, I remember hearing. Well, I know I heard some of these things on the dramatized in stereo double-decker bus tour. I believe the big one was that Stuart was going around to hit the Union rear. But some other things were, oh shit, what did we just say? That it just flew out of my mind. We were talking about the cannon shots and, oh damn it, there was another one that just popped into my head that we don't talk about anymore, but it was one of these. Well, I guess I heard these things from guides a lot back in the day.
Sure.
And they, they swore that it was, they didn't acknowledge it as a myth or a legend. Right. It was, this is what happened and everything. But then somewhere along the way, that changes. But it's not that the knowledge changed. It's always with knowledge that was there. But it's somewhere along the line, it seems that somebody decided, let's just ignore what we know here because it sounds better if we say it this way. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I think it actually is more over the decades, and particularly since the 1980s, really the 1990s, the 2000s, people did really, really amazing research.
Yeah.
And they were unearthing all of these sources that nobody had tapped into. I mean, I can tell you from my own experience, there were 2 or 3 times that we had Eastern National gave us a grant, and I sent this fellow named Daryl Smoker, who was a really good researcher. I sent him up to the upper Midwest. I sent him to New York State, and I sent him to one other place in the country to go through archives. And it was unbelievable how much stuff he found that nobody had ever seen. Nobody had ever looked at it.
Okay.
I mean, somebody might have looked at it. Maybe
But
somebody's
nobody cared
writing a
to-
history of the
yeah.
55th Ohio or something like that. So they went to this historical society. But, and the other thing about it was amazing is he had all these notes of things that he saw, but he didn't have time to copy. But the point that I'm making is that when I came to Gettysburg in 1979, Coddington, which is still stands the test of time,
Sure.
is one of the great books of the Gettysburg campaign. That was kind of, people are like, yeah, that's kind of the Bible, but it's really dense. It's really kind of hard to read. I read it.
Pull that mic a little closer to your mouth. When
I
you
read it. I'm like, I don't think it's hard to read.
No, it's not.
I think it's very well written.
Yeah.
But we were encouraged to read Glenn Tucker, High Tide at Gettysburg, because Glenn Tucker was a newspaper man, and he was a very good writer. And also, I would say Glenn Tucker, he liked a good story, but Glenn Tucker did kind of the best research Glenn Tucker could do in the 1950s. So Glenn Tucker could have done a much better job 40 years later in the 1990s.
Sure.
So I think we were continually building, and then there were historians coming along who were questioning the narrative that had emerged from the war. And it's unbelievable when I worked at Gettysburg how much is simply repackaged and regurgitated.
Yeah.
And people don't actually do original research or do original thinking. They just repackage it. They write it very well and cleverly, and they put it back out there. And it's just the same story, right? So these same things get told over and over again. But I think over time, our knowledge of what actually happened at Gettysburg has improved dramatically. So you could find a ranger or a guide in the 1970s, and one of them might have, in the late 70s, might have been Scott Hartwig, right? Who was saying things that 10 years later, Scott Harwig is not going to say.
Yeah.
Because he's looked at the new evidence that the park has received, and he's like, oh, that's wrong. That is not right. That's why I always get very annoyed with people when they talk about politically correct history. I'm like, history is not stagnant, folks.
Right.
And the other thing is, someone can come along who's really brilliant and looks at something that a lot of people have looked at and is like, I don't think you've interpreted this right.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it should be interpreted differently.
Yeah.
So, so that's where I think why things have changed over time, and that why the J.E.B. Stuart story, riding into the rear, has started to lose. It hasn't completely lost its luster. It still exists.
Does it? I never hear anybody saying that anymore.
Tom Carhart wrote an entire book about it. He was a West Point graduate.
But when was that?
10 years ago.
Yeah.
10 years ago.
I'm saying since 10 years ago. I don't hear it much.
I mean, but the thing is that when you get out amongst the John Q public, it's unbelievable how these stories resonate, and they're very difficult to dislodge.
Sure. I believe that. I mean, because when I heard it, I remember saying to my dad, it's like, Dad, did you know that J.E.B. Stuart was what? And he's like, oh, no, that's interesting. And then, but I thought it was exhilarating to think that like that's what was supposed to happen, but it got thwarted by Custer, because I was a big Custer guy.
Custer.
So I was like, Custer single-handedly stopped the great J.E.B. Stuart, And but then you read more into it, and you realize, or more about it, and you realize that it's not that fanciful.
And never underestimate the huge impact of Hollywood. So you've got the Errol Flynn, they died with their boots on, and you have Winfield Scott in Washington. And thank God we have Custer.
yeah, exactly. And you better believe, like, that was the first Custer movie I saw, and that's when I became like a big Custer nut. And I thought it was great. I was like, wow, this guy did everything, and he died with his boots on.
Yeah, I mean, the power of that is so immense on so many people, because even though they might read things that challenge that, it sometimes just sticks in their brain.
Can't shake it.
It can't shake it.
To this day, with all of the work that I've done on this show, with every visual or whatever, when certain names are mentioned, I picture the actor from Gettysburg and not the guy.
Absolutely.
And because it's just emblazoned in my mind.
Yep.
They also did, for the most part, for especially Chamberlain, they did a good job finding lookalikes. For the most part.
It also speaks to me, the power of the actor.
Yeah.
If you remember that actor, that they actually did a performance that was very memorable.
Oh, yeah.
So
you were in the 20th Maine scene,
I was
weren't
in the 20th Maine scene.
Yeah.
Yes, I was. My head down.
Were you? And you were working for the Park Service at the time.
Yeah.
What did you? So you've got these two giant books about Antietam. There's tons of articles you've written over the year about Gettysburg and other things. How do you keep all of that in your head?
You don't.
I mean, but like it's a lot. I mean, to master Gettysburg, is a big deal.
It is a lot.
But then you went and wrote over 20 years, I think you said.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
These two giant books about. They're like family Bibles. They're so.
They
big.
are like family Bibles.
Yeah. About Antietam.
Yeah.
Which is a whole other battle to learn about. All new characters, different movements, different conditions of the army, structure of the armies.
Oh, yeah.
It's a lot to learn.
It is a lot to learn, and you have to, it has to be something that interests you and, draws you in. I mean, I went to, 2 days ago, was it 2 days ago or was it yesterday? I think it was yesterday. I went to Joe Gladhar's lecture about the Army of the Potomac.
Yeah, I was there.
And I suspect that there were some people in the audience who were kind of bored because it was a lot of
statistics.
Because he had this sample of 800 soldiers. I thought it was phenomenal.
I did too. We were just talking about this before.
I thought it was phenomenal.
Yeah.
I learned so much about the Army of the Potomac.
What was the one that stood out to you the most?
It's hard to say which one it was. It was the casualties. I mean, that really stood out to me.
What part of it?
The number of soldiers, the percentage of soldiers who were killed or died of wounds in the Army of the Potomac compared to I think it was like 17 or 21% of everyone who served in the Army of the Potomac died. That was mind-boggling.
Yeah.
4 of the 5 biggest battles in the American Civil War were fought by the Army of the Potomac.
Yeah.
I mean, and then the some of the things he had about immigration, the immigrants in the Army. Mm-hmm. The other thing that I thought was super fascinating was that the overwhelming majority of men in that Army were volunteers.
Yes.
Because what we always hear, the narrative that gets told, because there's no data, nobody had any data, nobody's done the data like Joe Gladhar has just done the data, is they were filled with draftees and substitutes. Mm-hmm. Well, when you look at that,
substitutes was like what, 2%?
Like 2.9%.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah, that kind of surprised me too, because that's one of those fine, smaller details of something that gets blown out of proportion.
Right.
Because I thought that every rich person was getting a substitute, and so it must have been. But I guess if rich people are 1% of the population, then 2.9% is actually kind of high.
Right. Yeah. I mean,
I guess.
But you would think that by that point in the war, a fair number of people who might get drafted are going to be like, I'm going to hire a substitute. But I think, the other thing he had in there is that a lot of these men who were in the Army came from economic circumstances that were not great. They didn't have a lot of assets.
I couldn't believe that.
Yeah.
But again, he made the point. They're young.
Yeah.
So what assets do you have when you're young? What, Mike?
But also urbanized.
Yeah.
Yeah, urban.
Compared to the regular populace, a higher proportion of urbanized young men compared to who were actually in the cities themselves from a general populace perspective.
And the big one that stood out to me was that there were slightly more casualties among middle and upper class soldiers than lower class. And then he says it wasn't a rich man's war and a poor man's fight, which I always just assumed was true. Right. But that's just one of those bumper sticker slogans. Yeah. Right. That probably somebody with a agenda came up with and put into our.
But it's also, it shows you why when people are like, I ran into this working at Gettysburg when I was trying to get these research grants to go do research and get, more sources for our park library. What do you need that for? You know everything we need to know. I'm like, no, we don't.
No, we don't.
There's a huge amount of stuff we don't know. And there's so many facets also, I think, that you want to know about. You want to know about the battle. You want to know about the aftermath of the battle. You want to know about the early park history when they're starting to actually create a park there, the Memorial Association, the monumentation of the park, the reunions they have on the park, the way the military used the park, the way it's used by, the military in Camp Colt. I mean, there's all these things. I'm like, you should be the place that has the source material on all of these. I mean, I never had time to do all of the stuff that I wanted to do, but Gladhard to me was an example of when people are like, I mean, it's just a bunch of, what are these guys doing? Just politically correct stuff. I'm like, no, that's history.
Right.
They are adding to our knowledge. All these years, we've presumed all of these things using anecdotal evidence, not using data. He's using the data. He's got the data.
Yeah.
And he's right. I mean, so it's adding to our knowledge, and that's the thing I really liked about his talk.
What do you think that is? Because I have to admit, I should be able to explain this with what I'm about to say, but I used to be, when I was younger, I used to be one of those revisionist history, it's just politically correct history or whatever. But as I got older, I kind of tempered myself and I was less whatever that is. And then when I started doing this, I was like, well, okay, I could do what's comfortable, or I could actually learn something.
Yeah.
Let me try to learn something, So I was like, all right, all my preconceived notions, I'm going to wipe them away and I'm going to act like I am new to the Battle of Gettysburg and start over again. It's very hard to do because you still want to go and picture Jeff Daniels as Chamberlain, but I was able to do it because I'm I don't know, I guess I'm good at tricking my own brain sometimes. And what I found was it's far more fascinating than what I thought I knew.
Yeah,
because I'm learning more. I learned about the civilians and the African American community in town and what they did and what they went through, and all of the stuff around the battle has become, I wouldn't say more interesting to me, but more interesting than it was 10 years ago.
Sure.
I didn't even think about that stuff 10 years ago. So, but what in most people though, like what do you think that is though, that where they don't want to, what is it that they don't want to challenge their worldview, or they want to just consume comfortable history, or what is that?
I think that's a part of it, is that people have a comfort zone in their history, and a lot of people don't like change, any sort of change in any way.
Believe me, I hate it. I just turned 47 today, and I'm like, I don't like the aches and pains. Thank you.
Good luck.
I know. Believe me, thank you. I need it. I can feel it already.
But yeah, I think, there's a lot of things that I don't like change wise, but, I just think that is a big part of it, is that people, they're comfortable with the story that's being told. and they don't want to challenge that story because they think that story is the truth.
Mm-hmm.
And when someone comes along, some younger historian or something like that, particularly if it's a female, and they tell something else, they're like, they're prone to just discredit it.
Yeah.
No, it can't be true. And, it's not to say also, and like what you were saying about, revisionist history and politically correct history. And there are some things that are out there that are revisionist or that are trying to be politically correct that aren't really very good history. I mean,
like gay Abraham Lincoln.
That would be one.
Yeah,
that would be one. Most of the time, it is somebody who is trying to sell books, right, or sell videos or whatever it is, because they're trying to take an angle that, oh, whoa, this is the untold story. Nobody's ever told this story before. Nobody's heard this before, and then they get upset when you challenge what they want to believe, because they just want to believe this. They want to believe. Like, I certainly encountered this a lot, particularly once we opened the new museum at the park in 2008. People who had, and this is certainly not a broad brush, because there were a lot of people who had ancestors who fought for the Confederacy, who were proud of their ancestors' courage.
Mm-hmm.
They fought in these battles. They were brave. They served. However, they're very clear-eyed about what the war was about, right? But then you also had people who were like, I don't want to hear that. I don't want to hear it. They fought for good reasons. They were brave. They were heroic. They were fighting for states' rights against this federal land grab, blah, 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 blah. And it doesn't matter what evidence you show that person. You can show them all the evidence that you want. It doesn't make any difference. They just blow it off, discredit it, don't want to hear it. You're not going to win those sort of people over.
No.
But, I just would say that, you have to, you always have to be looking critically at the story, but don't look at it critically because you want to make a splash.
Right.
I'm finding somebody nobody's ever found before.
Right.
No one's ever said, really? I mean, all these historians have looked at this and they're all wrong?
Right,
Every single one of them?
Yeah.
What's your evidence? Well, I feel it. Okay.
Yeah. The old feelings. You mentioned the new visitor center. You had a hand in a lot of that. Yeah. Right? Mm-hmm. The design of it and what goes in there and all that stuff. What I remember when that was happening.
Yeah.
And when the news came out that the gallery was going to take us from, what does it start? Pre-slave or pre-colonial or I'm sorry, not, it starts colonial, not revolutionary, right?
Yeah, it really just kind of starts with, America is a slaveholding republic when it's founded.
Okay, so the founding of the country.
Yeah.
Okay. So, and it takes us all the way through and beyond Gettysburg.
Right. So what is the meaning of the Civil War?
Yeah.
So it takes you to the end of the Civil War. So why does the war happen? What is the meaning of the war?
And I remember at that time, people were, got to hit us over the head with slavery everywhere we go.
Right.
But the argument that the park was making was like, look, somebody's going to come here or to a Civil War site. This is most likely the one they're going to come to. And they're only going to come to it once in their life. So we got to get it all in there.
Yeah.
And I understand that. That makes sense to me. But what is that what you were thinking when you did that? Or was that just kind of like the company line that they said, well, we better come up with something that sounds good?
No. It was, we wanted to let the voices of the people who lived it speak. And I remember I had some of my seasonals and interns, because I would divvy up different things, research projects for them to do. And one of the projects was I wanted them to find voices pro and anti-secession at the beginning of the war, and from all over the country, because we had this database that people could go into. We had an exhibit in there, an interactive exhibit that had different voices. But then we had this database in the back that you could go, there was like hundreds of them in there, right? So we had all these different documents and things. so on in there. And when you did that research and you looked at that research, there was no way, if you were a person with a brain in your head, a thinking person, that you could not walk out of there and say slavery was the reason for secession and the war. Because it's the only thing. Like when I first came to Gettysburg, I'd hear people, it was the tariffs, it was states' rights. It was, it was slavery, that was part of it, but it was, it was states' rights and tariffs. And there was one other thing that they used to throw in there. They didn't even talk about those other things. Nobody talks about tariffs. Nobody talks about tariffs.
Right.
Like there's a small mention of it in the congressional record. The only reason they're talking about states' rights is because if the slave states felt that they could have protected slavery with a stronger federal government, they would have been for a strong federal government. But they recognized that wasn't the way to go because they'd had the federal government for a long time, but now they were losing their grip on it. So states' rights becomes important because if the state regulates the property, the federal government cannot intervene and abolish slavery, right? So states' rights becomes the defense of slavery. Anyway, so the point was that this wasn't like we were trying to put something down people's throat we were trying to tell a damn story, right? This is the story.
Right.
It's not this. The other thing, I had this one woman once who called me. She was from South Carolina, and she said hello, and she said, "I'm boycotting Gettysburg." Like, oh man, I'm sorry to hear that.
Good for you.
Okay. What are you boycotting? Well, you guys are telling politically correct history up there.
Okay.
Oh, we are. What's the problem? You people are all. This is when Jesse Jackson Jr. He was in Congress, and he introduced this legislation that said it didn't. A lot of people blew it way out of proportion. What Jesse Jackson Jr. was saying, I want the national parks, Civil War parks, to talk about slavery. Talk about it. He wasn't telling us what to say. I want you to talk about it. There should be something in there that connects this war to slavery when you walk into Stones River or Chickamauga or Antietam or Gettysburg, because he went to all of them. And none of them talked about it. Right? Because we didn't. When I was
that a rule?
No, it was
just the way
a safety mechanism.
Oh, so
it was a safety mechanism because the Park Service knew that there was a segment of the country that did not want to hear anything about slavery. So what we did is we watered it down. So like in our student education programs, we tell students, well, there was slavery, but there was states' rights, and there was the tariff, and there were sectional differences, and these were all the things. There were kind of these differences, and that's kind of what the war. So you watered it down enough that it didn't offend anybody, right? And the point is, you're not trying to offend anybody. You're simply trying to tell people, this is the evidence. Here is the evidence, overwhelming evidence of what happened.
Right.
So it's overwhelming evidence. It isn't the tariffs. It isn't states' rights. It isn't some other thing, whatever I can't think of at the moment. It is slavery. It's the only thing. And John Mosby famously said, he goes, hey, that's the only thing we argued with the North about. I mean, that's what the war was about. Why is everybody saying it wasn't?
If they had won, they wouldn't be hiding it.
But they wouldn't hide it.
No.
Because the thing is, if you read the newspapers of the era after the war is over and once the redeemers have so-called redeemed the South, and you see what they say, there's no question in your mind when you read these things in the papers on a regular basis. They are beyond belief racist stuff that is out there. So the point is here is you're not trying to beat anybody over the head. And you're also, we try to be really clear about this. Like, we're not trying to ascribe blame to somebody here.
Right.
We're trying to tell what happened and why it happened. Because we also included, this is one thing that always stuck in my mind because I never forgot it. There was a guy who wrote an editorial in a newspaper in New Hampshire. And his argument, 1861, he's like, let them go. Let them go. Let them have their independence. I mean, we don't want the slaves up here, so why not give them their independence?
Yeah.
So you think a lot of times, oh, the North is all united, everybody's behind this. And like, no, they weren't. I mean, there were people who were just like, just let them go. We're not going to fight over this thing. And, what we were trying to do is help visitors see there's a multitude of opinions. There always is a multitude of opinions about every single issue that's really a big issue.
Yeah.
But there is a consensus that you can find about certain things. So there is ultimately a consensus in the North that preserving the Union is worth fighting for. That's why so many people, that's what Joe Gladar is talking about, all these soldiers enlisting in the Army. And then, yes, as the war goes on, initially it's true, there were Union soldiers. Like this, I addressed this in my second book about Antietam, because this always annoyed me. I ran into this in the National Cemetery all the time with some rangers and with some, brand new interns. Lincoln issues the Emancipation Proclamation, and the soldiers overwhelmingly reject it. They don't agree with it. That they're racist to the core, et cetera. I'm like, well, a lot of them were racist. No question about that, right? Because they lived in a white man's world. They didn't think the way we think today on a lot of things. But I'm like, that just isn't true. That isn't true. You're cherry picking your evidence. If you're a Democrat, you probably didn't like the Emancipation Proclamation. If you were a Republican, you did.
Okay.
So what I found when I went through,
So like everything else.
right, exactly.
like, yeah.
So as I was going through all these different accounts from various soldiers in the different Army Corps and the Army of the Potomac after the Battle of Antietam, not always, but generally I found the Democrats did not like the Emancipation Proclamation. They thought it was a mistake by Lincoln. Now, very, very few men are like, oh, you know what? I'm going to desert the Army. I'm done. Very, very few men are going to do that. Amongst Republicans, most of them are like, yeah, this is good. I don't think you went far enough, right? Some of them are saying that, right? So, and then as the war goes on, then you have this period that Joe Gladar had that really great graphic about desertion rate.
Yeah.
When you looked at January through March 1863, the desertion's like skyrocket in the Army of the Potomac. Well, that was a period of the war. That was the Valley Forge of the Army, because the Army, they felt amongst the rank and file that they had been sacrificed at Fredericksburg in just idiotic attacks, right? They didn't see any point in what they were doing. And then on top of it, they're like, what are we doing here? I mean, emancipation? I mean, this, I don't know if it, so they really questioned it. But then Hooker comes in, restores the morale. And the other thing that Hooker did when he came in is he ran out of Dodge some of these newspapers who were feeding soldiers anti-administration articles and, content.
Right.
And he started encouraging these newspapers that were more pro-administration. But so soldiers are getting, we know the value of, video, printed press, etc. like that. They didn't have video, obviously, but they had the printed press. And that can really sway people's opinions. But the other part of it was, I think a lot of soldiers, as they thought about this, they don't make their mind up and then don't change it. But as they think about it, they're like, you know what? Yeah, this makes sense. I mean, that's their labor force. That's how they can put all these guys into the field who are fighting and trying to kill me. And if we attack that, that makes military sense to me.
Right.
Yeah, I'm all for it. I'm good. There's a great letter from this soldier, Bowen. I forget his first name. He was in the 14th U.S. Infantry. And he's writing to his wife during the Overland Campaign. And he's been in a lot of fighting in the Overland Campaign. And he was writing his wife about, he'd seen the black troops, Ferrero's division. So he'd seen them. And so he's responding. You don't have his wife's letter, but his wife did not think black soldiers should be in the Army at all, whatsoever. And he put her in her place. He said, they're an honor to the Army. He'd observed them and he's like, hey man, if you're out here risking your life like we are,
sure,
I'm with you, man. I'm good. I like, so anyway, I mean, soldiers change their opinion over time. And I think that's reflected also in Joe Gladar when you looked at his desertion rate. The desertion rate as the war goes on starts to stabilize and go down. you're always going to have some people who don't want to be in the Army and get killed, or wounded, or
that'd be me. Yeah.
I mean, you're always going to have, and people desert for all different reasons. I did a paper years ago about the 69th Pennsylvania Infantry, and I went to the National Archives and I pulled all these military and pension records.
You gave us a tour.
Okay.
When we first started this, you were one of the early tours that we did at the 69th.
Yeah, and one of the things I did is they had, I think they had 17 deserters in the 3 weeks after the Battle of Gettysburg. Maybe it was 11. It was somewhere in that neighborhood. And I pulled all of their records to find. I'm like, I'm just curious. Why did these guys desert? Well, what would you think as a deserter? Why would you think a soldier is going to desert?
Well, there could be a number of reasons. But, I mean...
What would you think would be a common reason that they're going to desert?
Well, am I a farmer? I don't know. It's a common reason they would desert.
They just want to go home?
Well, I mean, the obvious one to me is like, I'm done.
Right.
Like, I'm done with this war. That would be me.
Yeah.
So, I don't know. What are you getting at?
I think there are some that's true. So, there was one fellow named George Haw. And George Haw was... he was like the personal orderly for the major of the regiment. The major gets really badly wounded and dies actually in 1869 from the effects of his wounds. And they had George Haw accompany the major from Gettysburg back to Philadelphia.
Okay.
And he gets them to Philadelphia by July 5th. Pretty amazing.
Wow.
Right? 2 days.
Yeah.
They travel all the way to Philadelphia. They get to Philadelphia. George Haw takes Duffy, who was the name of the major, to his house in Philadelphia, delivers him, walks out of there, goes down to the docks, signs on to the Merchant Marines under another name.
Oh, wow.
Was never heard of again.
Huh.
So now, this is only a presumption on my part.
But how'd you find that, though, if he signed another name? And
through the muster roll. That somebody had written that in the muster roll about him. Anyway, so my presumption was George Haw was like, that's it. I'm not doing that again. I can't do that again. There's another fellow named William Farrell. And William Farrell, his name is not on the Pennsylvania Monument. So he is wounded on July the 3rd. He fights on the 2nd, fights on the 3rd. He's wounded on July the 3rd. He's evacuated from the battlefield. He's eventually taken to a hospital in Philadelphia. So he's in the hospital in Philadelphia. And he doesn't know that the Colonel Dennis O'Kane was killed in the battle. And he'd had trouble with O'Kane. We don't know what the trouble was, but he'd had trouble with O'Kane. And he's like, I'm not going back to that regiment. So one day he gets up, walks out of the hospital. He goes down to the Marine Corps recruiting station. He signs on as William Giblin, serves 6 years in the Marine Corps, gets honorably discharged. Years later, applies for a pension. And this is before computers and everything, folks. They tracked down that he was a deserter. And they're like, okay, no pension for you for your service in the Army, but we'll give you one for your service in the Marine Corps. But the other part of the story that's kind of sad about William Farrell is that he fought honorably in the Battle of Gettysburg.
Yeah.
And then there's another guy who he gets captured in the battle. He's taken by the Confederates, and there is a skirmish by Union, I think it was Kilpatrick's cavalry. Intercept the column of prisoners that he was in. He gets his finger shot off in the skirmish, and he ends up in a hospital in like Arlington, Virginia. He's down there somewhere in Virginia. Because actually the skirmish took place down in Maryland, right? So he's in this hospital, and it took the system a while to find where he was. They didn't know where he was. So because the way the Army system worked, they couldn't figure out where he was. After a bit, they listed him as a deserter. So he's a deserter. So he's not going to be on the Pennsylvania Monument. So if you're listed as a deserter, even if you came back later on, you're not going to be on the monument, because they are looking at the records that they have. He deserted.
Yeah.
He was carried as a deserter on the rolls, and sometimes they didn't correct that. So
Bruce
a lot of reason why people desert.
Bruce Boxleitner.
Yeah.
So he was down to do that Christmas movie a couple of years ago.
Yes. Yeah.
And I was taking him around the battlefield, and he has an ancestor who was in the 8th Illinois Cavalry.
Oh,
and
yeah.
I was like, oh, well, you guys started the ball. Mm-hmm. And so we went and did stuff like that. And I found some book, I forget the book, about them online, and I ordered it on Amazon, and then I gave it to him, And we looked up his ancestor, and he's mentioned in the book as a deserter. We had a nice laugh over that. But he deserted, I think, actually before the battle.
Oh, okay.
And but I think he came back, though, if I'm not mistaken. I don't remember. Yeah.
A lot of deserters did.
But I think it's interesting. So the first guy that you said, he just joins the Merchant Marines.
Right.
Like he's just done with the Army, but he's not done with serving.
Right.
And that is interesting.
Yeah.
I guess like we were talking about this. We did a show earlier with Jim Broomall, and we were talking about we talked about a lot of things with Jim, but one of the things though was I guess motivations of soldiers and what made them stay, what made them leave, all that stuff. But also when they come back to civilian life, for a lot of them, it's very hard to adjust, because I was telling him a story about a friend of mine who was a Marine combat veteran, and he was saying that he missed it, because there's nothing close in civilian life, and he called it all phony, and and so I would imagine that maybe some guys, it's like, okay, I'm done with the Army, but let's try the Marines, and you go to the Marines, just
they
because
like the service. They like the service.
Yeah, you like the service, you like the structure, you like the whatever, the danger. Maybe you get that adrenaline rush.
And if you're an enlisted man, you also know that the odds that you're going to be able to transfer out of your unit into another unit, get away from the colonel who you don't like, are very low.
Right. Because the colonel has a say in that, doesn't he?
He's got a big say.
Oh, God. So how many CWIs have you gone to so far?
I don't know. Quite a few.
Yeah. I would imagine you were probably a mainstay at most of them, since they...
there's been some I haven't been to, and haven't done anything at, but my attitude is like, they have to change it up. They have to have different people in there.
Sure.
And I think it's good. It's healthy for the CWI to not use the same people all the time.
Yes.
So I never have any problem. I got plenty of things I can do.
Yeah,
I'm good.
Yeah.
It's fine.
I don't know. I think it bothers you, Scott. I didn't ask you about that at all. You just started going into that answer.
Yeah, no, it's so it I enjoy doing it, but there's been some I haven't done. Yeah.
And the one thing I've been meaning to ask you about, I don't think I ever did, is you play piano.
I do. Yeah.
Classically trained?
No, I took lessons when I was a kid for a number of years, but
like Goodnight Ladies and that type of lessons.
Learn how to play chords and stuff like that.
Do you still play?
I do.
Yeah,
I do. I my music that I like to play is ragtime.
I'm jealous. I can't get that stride thing going.
Yeah, it's
my left hand is tits
hard.
On a bull. Like it's useless.
Yeah.
I taught myself. Like the Doors were very influential, but that's easy because he does the bass on the left, but it's always these like very repetitive bass lines. So I was good at that, but this stride shit with like chords in my left hand, I can't do it.
Yeah,
I can't do it. I love that. You really play?
Yeah. I'm not that good. I was better, but I have neuropathy in my hands, so I can't feel the keys like I used to be able to feel them. And I also had this stupid pit bull attacked my dog a few years ago, and when I pulled the pit bull off, it messed up the tendons in my fingers, so my fingers bent. It's very hard to play chords with a bent pinky.
No, you could have like if you're playing organ, you can use it as a drone up top,
right.
and then you just play around. That sucks.
Yeah, it does.
That would kill me.
Yeah.
But so you don't play as well as you used to, or have you been able to adapt?
Well, but I do play. I mean,
You gotta play, right?
Yeah.
Do you have a piano at home or a keyboard?
I do. I now have a Yamaha electric keyboard. Okay. And it's really nice.
Yeah.
Really nice. I mean, you can set all the different sorts of sounds that you want on it. And
I just bought it's this Italian company called Crumar. And I forget, they have some highfalutin modern day term for this, but it's basically remember the Fender Rhodes?
Yeah.
Okay. So imagine a Rhodes. So you got to screw the legs in. It's a wooden case. It has a suitcase top and everything. You take off, like that whole thing.
Yeah.
But all the guts are digital.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. But the key bed is like a Rhodes. So it's wooden keys with the plastic coating and everything.
Yeah.
So it feels like you're playing a Rhodes. And they've got all these just amp simulations in there and everything.
Neat.
Oh, it's the coolest thing.
It's fun.
And it's not terribly expensive.
Yeah.
But my dream was always to have a Rhodes.
Yeah.
But they are terribly expensive. So
Yeah.
I found this and I was like, oh, it was like $2,000 compared to like $8,000.
Yeah.
Like a real Rhodes or something like that. So I was like, let me get this. But it's got like acoustic piano sounds in it and clavichords and everything.
Yeah.
But I don't know what they did, but you can hear when you're playing the Rhodes, you can hear the mechanics, even though there are no mechanics in there.
Cool.
Yeah. It's really when you put the sustain pedal down, you hear whatever the natural sound, for a Rhodes, you would hear that kind of mechanical sound.
Yeah.
When it's an acoustic piano, you would hear that kind of reverb that goes through the whole body of the piano when you open it up. It's really fun to play.
That's cool.
Yeah. And so I've been playing a lot more now
than
I used to, because I had a keyboard. It was like a Korg, I think, and it wasn't bad, but it wasn't great. Right. And for me, the instrument, if I have a hard time playing the instrument, I lose interest.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
So I finally have a keyboard I love, which is great.
Yeah.
Such a great feeling.
Playing music is like writing. If you don't do it on a regular basis, you'll never get any better.
No.
And then you won't play as much because you're not that good.
That's right. Yeah. That's why I blew the coin on a nicer keyboard.
Yeah.
Because I was like, if I'm ever going to get this back,
right,
I have to get something I enjoy playing, and then I'll do. And I do. I play it every day, and I bought a couple of Billy Joel books to get back to what I used to. Yeah. I used to play all that stuff, and you lose it over time, right?
Yeah.
You kind of remember it, but then you get that one chord. You go, was it this one or that one?
Right.
Yeah. So I'm trying to get back to it. Yeah. It's good for the soul.
It is good for the
soul. Even
soul.
if I never play out in public, or
it is.
It's just good to do.
Yes.
For yourself.
Yeah.
All right, Scott. Well, you're going to do a tour for our nonprofit, but we're going to talk about that next week, so people can watch that and everything. But I want to thank you for coming and doing this.
Well, thanks for.
I always enjoy talking to you. Yeah. We don't do it enough.
Me too. Yeah, it was fun.
Probably good for you that we don't do it enough.
No, I enjoy it.
But I enjoy it.
I enjoy it.
Mike, thank you again for your work on the camera there. Okay. And thank all of you for watching or listening, and have a good one. Bye-bye.
All right.
Thanks, Scott.
All right, man.
I appreciate that.
Oh, yeah.
Right. Now endorsed by a Pulitzer Prize winner. Do you like coffee?
I can't really drink coffee.
Why not? You don't like the taste of it?
No, caffeine.
Oh, I hear you. But you used to drink coffee.
I have drank coffee.
Too bad this wasn't around back in the day when you drank coffee.
Right.
Because you would have enjoyed this. This is our coffee. It's called Little Ground Top. It's roasted right here in Gettysburg at 82 Steinware Avenue, Bantam Roasters. You can go in anytime. You can get a bag whenever you want. Smell that, though, Anna. Isn't that wonderful?
It smells
really good. It does smell really nice,
yes,
doesn't it?
It does.
You could just keep a bag of this in your living room. just for the smell, right?
Yeah.
But you got to get it ground first. You know, they could do it in whole bean or ground. You can get it ground if you want it for drip coffee or French press, whatever. It's just fantastic. You could also buy it online if you, when you get back home to Pittsburgh and you decide, oh, my friend loves coffee. Oh, I just heard about this little ground top. Well, you go to addressinggettysburg.com/cafe and you can order it there and get it, and you don't ever have to set foot in Gettysburg again. Not that you wouldn't want to, because and not that we don't want you to. We love having you here, so you come back as often as you want. But yeah, little ground top. So 82 Steinway Avenue, Bantam Roasters here in Gettysburg, or addressinggettysburg.com/cafe.